The first sound Lilette Ancrum heard that morning was the lowing of cattle far off in the fog, as if the river itself had learned to groan. She lay on the pallet beside her sister in the quarter-house, tracing letters on the underside of the roof with the tip of her finger, the alphabet a quiet braid she made to steady her breath. Cocks crowed with vain certainty, and in the main house a piano struck a hesitant, gilded chord. Someone rehearsing, someone counting the beats to a day dressed like a bride. The wedding would be at sundown, beneath the live oak people called the Bishop for the way its arms draped like vestments and its bark kept the dead's secrets. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. Dessa slept curled toward the wall, her dark hair pinned with bits of straw ribbon she had twisted the night before. Lilette watched the rise of her sister's shoulders and felt the morning stampede in her own chest, the clatter of hooves that was fear and decision mixed into something almost like calm. She turned her finger from letters to knots, charting the loops she had learned on the river, the bow line that held but could be untied, the constrictor that never forgave, the fisherman's bend that joined what wasn't meant to join. The roof beams kept their silence. The fog pressed its shoulder against the door. They rose with the other women when the bell rang, though Lilette had been awake for some hours already. She slipped the scrap of linen she kept under her pallet into her apron pocket, a square that had once been the hem of a master's shirt, blue-edged, and on it, faint in charcoal, a prayer that wasn't very good, but was hers. Lead me to the hour I need. She couldn't read fluently like she dreamed, but she read enough to make sense of newspaper scraps left to wrap soap or bacon. She had taught Dessa to shape letters with a stick in the dust behind the smokehouse. Their literacy lived like a candle stub hidden inside a bone cup, lit only when no one looked. In the kitchen, heat lifted like a wall. Pans rattled and copper lids gleamed as if they had woken proud. Lilette was assigned to Miss Clarabelle's wedding supper, biscuits, turtle soup, syllabub tough as lace, and sugared orange peels for the favor cones. She worked with Aunt Viney, who could bone a fish with her eyes closed and whose wrists still bore scars from some long-ago winter nobody named. Aunt Viney wore her smile like a blade. "You look like a thought is sitting heavy on you," she murmured without turning. "Let it eat or let it move." "It's moving," Lilette said. She slid a tray of biscuits onto the shelf near the window, leaned there a breath to feel the little cool that seeped through the glass. From this angle she could see across the yard to the oak whose roots swelled out like drowsy beasts. Men were already stringing ribbon from limb to limb, and the white ladies had sent word for garlands, magnolia and cyምላx, and 2 lengths of plaited satin to drape as if the tree wore a sash. Dessa passed through on the way to the big house to alter the bride's bodice, a roll of needles in her sleeve and a thimble tucked on her thumb. She touched Lilette's hip as she went by, a flick of a signal they had used since they were girls. "I see you. Still here." The tip of Dessa's nose had a dusting of flour from the biscuit table where she had stolen a breath to laugh at something one of the children said. Her laugh had always been too bright for the math of the world. Lilette held that sound in her mouth a moment, then swallowed. The plan had not always been a plan. For months it had been a rumor in the body, a habit of thought that came like an itch and left like a fever leaving a bed damp. Since winter, since the day Mr. Paul, the overseer with eyes that never blinked fully, caught Jonas ducking from the gin house and set him to the post for a lesson while the snow hissed on the cane, Lilette had carried a fist inside her ribs. She stitched while Jonas's breath went ropey and thin, and when he died that night coughing like a yard dog, Miss Clarabelle had said prettily, "We mustn't be sentimental. He was a field hand and bound to be fragile." Lilette understood then that one kind of hunger could be filled and another kind sharpened forever. If you listened to the house walls long enough, they told you how things arrived at what they looked like. Lilette had listened. She knew that Miss Clarabelle's groom, a man called Mr. Cyrus Bramwell, had a face like a newly ironed shirt and a voice like a hymn put to a better tune. That his father, Judge Bramwell, owned 2 parishes over and dealt in land like some men dealt in cards. That the agreement between the families had been sealed with tobacco and a ledger's smile long before any flowers were considered. She knew which men laughed loudest when they drank and which were true cruel on an empty stomach. She knew that the bride's train had a stiffening sewn in that scratched like nettle, and she knew how to remove it. What Lilette knew felt like a belt of little knives hidden under a dress. At midday, Dessa returned to the kitchen with the gown to be pressed and the veil to be steamed. "She wants it more gathered at the waist," Dessa said while Aunt Viney trimmed pastry, "like it'll make the rest of her smaller by trick." She glanced at the door and lowered her voice. "And she wants pearls along the hem. I told her ain't time, and she smiled and said, 'There is when I say there is.'" Dessa's smile could make a blade forget its point, but now it had no home on her face. "She asked me if our mama ever wore pearls." Lilette's hand slowed. "What did you say?"
"I told her our mama wore shell you find yourself and make shine." Dessa set the veil down as if it were a guest she didn't trust. She touched the blue-edged scrap peeking from Lilette's apron. "You carrying prayers again?" "Only the small ones." Lilette turned to the pantry where the cords and laces were kept. On the shelf lay the 2 lengths of white satin rope ordered for the ceremony arch, each as long as a man's arm and smooth as cream. She had braided them herself the night before in the light of tallow and breath, adding inside the weave something no eye would see, 2 narrow cords of hemp, drawn thin and soaked in lye, then rinsed in clear river water, the kind that hardened like a future. She lifted one length, felt its weight, and thought of the river knots again, how a loop could become a collar if you changed your mind about it. Lilette had not planned to change her mind so long or so often, but a plan has its own thirst. By late afternoon, the yard shone with effort. The ladies' voices, high and pale as the porcelain cups they favored, skimmed the air. The men's boots printed the soil with right angles. Children were chased out of sight, to be clean again later. The bishop oak held still as scripture, and under it 2 chairs had been set, one for the judge and one for the groom, to rest before the preacher arrived from his other appointments. Miss Clarabelle passed through the kitchen like a perfumed wind. "Girls, do be brisk. It will be the most elegant affair this parish has ever witnessed. Mr. Cyrus deserves only the finest, and Papa must see his investment bloom." Papa. The word hung like a bell's tongue, heavy with chime not yet struck. Aunt Viney lifted her flowery hands and let them fall. "Investment," she said without tone, as if naming a weed while pulling it. "Take the veil, child. Steam only. Don't pull a thread that ain't yours to pull." Lilette took the veil and held it over the kettle's breath until the edges lay soft as fog. She watched the steam condense and run down in clear lines like writing she might someday learn to parse without guessing. Through the window, the sun shrugged a shoulder from the cloud shawl, the light sharpening everything it touched, the silver, the ribbon, the white men's teeth when they laughed at a joke about the preacher's tardiness. Dessa stood near the porch steps with a basket of rose heads, her profile quiet and stern. She looked like a sentence that dared you to finish it. In the narrow hollow between kitchen and smokehouse, where a skim of shade collected, Lilette and Dessa stood close, the cords wrapped in muslin in Lilette's arms. The smell of salt pork and cooling lye soap filled the seam of air. "It don't have to be tonight," Dessa whispered. "We could wait, a day after, a week after the judge goes home." "Waiting is a kind of yes that turns into always," Lilette said. She touched her sister's wrist, traced there the vein that told time. "We choose it, and then it chooses us back. I ain't marrying the waiting." Dessa looked down. A net drifted toward her eye, and she blinked it away. "I ain't never seen a strangling," she said in a voice that wore shoes too big. "You ain't going to see one. You going to do a job that was born to your hands. You sew and you drape and you set what must be set. That's all. The seeing can go to somebody else. What if they look in our faces and know? They won't know. White folks don't see what they teach themselves not to see. They taught it good. Lillette lifted the muslin and showed the satin to her sister. Touch it. It looks like what they like to think softness means. It feels like what we know it means when it's earned. Dessa touched the cord, her fingers steadier than her voice. I dreamed last night I was braiding hair, Mama's hair, and the braid went on, long as the river, and at the end of it was a door. Lillette swallowed. Then we going to get to a door. She smiled a thin smile. Might it don't open sweet. Might it demand a word we ain't learned to say yet. But a door is a door. From the porch, Miss Clarabelle called, Dessa, come stitch me in. I've had an idea about the sash. Dessa lifted the basket. I'll see you under the bishop, as if they were girls promising to meet by the spring to look at minnows. She set off at a careful, trained half-run, just short of what would be called unladylike for a servant. Lillette tucked the cords back under muslin and breathed once, twice, and then walked into the bevel of light where the preacher finally arrived, wiped his brow, and rehearsed his blessings. There is a way ceremony makes the world narrow and mean. It uses lace to do it. Lillette had watched weddings before, the way men pretended weightlessness for an hour, and women borrowed the ministry of white cloth to forgive themselves for what came after. The words themselves were good, like dry beans you could soak into supper, but in the mouths that held them here, they turned to gravel. She preferred prayers written in steam and ash, where nobody could sell them. She laid the cords across the arch of the oak and worked the knots in, small brown hands moving with quiet fluency of a river animal. No one noticed. The judge had his flask, the groom had his mirror, and the ladies had each other, eyes that nibbled like mice. Mr. Cyrus stood broad and dapper, cravat white enough to blind, hair oiled and parted like a field after the plow. He was not unhandsome. Handsome was never the point. Aunt Viney's niece Belle played the piano for, rolled onto the porch, the tune a bright circle that returned always to its own beginning. Doves kept house in the oak's elbows. The kitchen clock struck a half hour, and the same minute a pair of fieldmen pushed barrels of lemonade onto the lawn as if they were hauling hours. Lillette tested her knots. The lie-hardened hemp inside the satin lay quiet and ready as bone. Dessa appeared on the porch in the dressmaker's apron Miss Clarabelle allowed only on preparation days. A needle flashed in her hand like a bit of captured lightning. She was bareheaded because the white ladies lacked her seamstress to look like the idea of a child. Lillette felt something swell in her throat that was neither grief nor pride, but some unspeakable syllable both belonged to. The preacher called for the families. Women arranged themselves like sugar tongs. Men spread their hands over their vests as if to bless their own ribs. Miss Clarabelle descended the steps, veil puffing around her face like milkweed. In the right light, with the sun doing its usual miracle and everyone willing their eyes to the same dream, she looked like goodness itself. Lillette botched the breath of the veil and thought of fog and ships that run aground gentle as a kiss and break just the same. At the last minute, Judge Bramwell declared he wanted the bride to stand between him and his son while he offered a father's words. He settled into the chair facing the oak, a man in a room built of tree and sky, his features arranged in that tender arrogance men get when their money gives them permission for sentiment. Mr. Cyrus stood to the right. The knot of people made a half ring. Lillette took her place on the left, under the arch, hands folded, a servant turned decor.
Friends, the judge began, neighbors, kin. He spoke like a book that believed itself. He talked of providence and plans, of the good tobacco years and the promise of new gin, of how the Bramwells and the Garritys had joined not just fortunes but burdens, so that neither would break. He even said God with the softness of a man who liked how the word felt in his mouth. When he was done with that, he nodded to the preacher, who had the look of a man being paid in both coin and the sweet milk of importance.
The preacher opened his Bible. Lilette knew that book. She had rubbed words from a broken page so many times the letters had ghosted onto the skin of her fingers. "Love is patient," the preacher said, and Lilette thought of Jonas's back, the calloused map of it, and how patience is sometimes only a lock with no key until someone makes one. The preacher read on, and around the edges of his sound, the kitchen doors swung and glinted, and Aunt Viney's army marched out with platters. The oak threw thin shade like anointed fingers. Somewhere a fly insisted upon its rights. When the vows came, Lilette moved the length of a breath to the side where her left hand could reach the drape of satin. She watched Miss Clarabelle lift her eyes to her groom as if she were putting a small bird back into a cage with her glance alone. She watched Mr. Cyrus's lips move around words that spoke of honor with admirable clarity. She let the applause of leaves and distant cows sink to a tone she could ride. Now. That was what the day had been braided toward. But now is a word you must measure the way you measure fire. Too soon and it eats you. Too late and it forgets you are there. Lilette's eyes went after them an instant. That was when Mr. Paul, the overseer, stepped to the side of the arch, his hat in his hand, as if on some errand of gallantry, and he stood too close to where Lilette stood, so close she could smell the bitter of his last coffee. He sighed like a man too burdened with women's nonsense, and put his shoulder against the trunk, unthinking. The arch shifted the smallest amount. The satin dipped and rose. He blinked slow, eyes half closed as always, and in that lazy look was the whole world's danger. "Pretty," he said to no one. To the tree, maybe, to the women uncounted. "A pretty drape you made there." Lilette smiled the smile of servants, the one that says nothing and everything both. "Yes, sir." The preacher tried again. "Do you, Clarabelle, take this man?" Miss Clarabelle glowed. "I do," she said too soon, and the laughter came back, grateful to be useful. "And to be your lawful," the preacher continued, a little miffed, and the groom's mouth quirked at the edges as if to forgive the poor man. "Now," Lilette whispered without moving her lips. The word traveled no farther than the inside of her own head, but Dessa heard it all the same. Years of speaking with eyes had taught them the weight of breath. Dessa's hand found the veil again, smoothing, her other hand hidden by the white cloud at the bride's back. Lilette's fingers curled, then relaxed, then curled again, exactly the way she had practiced with string and chair lead in the loft of the smokehouse at midnight when even the rats slept. She did not pull, she guided. The satin obeyed, as if it had been waiting to be shown how to move. The judge's breath lifted his chest. The groom inclined his head. Aunt Viney, across the yard, set down a platter with a thud that felt like a drum. Somewhere near the kitchen door, Belle missed a note and caught it in the next beat, making a brief, sweet wrongness that told you a real person was inside the song. A pale moth circled the arch and touched the ribbon, and rested like a word at the end of a sentence that waits for its period. Lilette felt the chord ask for her, and she gave just enough to answer. Then Mr. Paul shifted again and said, "Hold up." The world slowed the way it does when a pot slips from your hand and you know exactly how it will smash and cannot make it stop, but can make it change shape by where your foot is. Lilette lifted her eyes a fraction. Mr. Paul's gaze had sharpened, narrowed like a cock's before it pecks. He was looking not at her face, but at her hands. He had noticed the way cloth lay on bark. He had noticed that the drape had intentions. "What you doing there?" he said, quiet enough the judge wouldn't bother to hear, loud enough Lilette had to answer. "Fixin' to fall," she murmured. "It slipped when the boy ran." He took one slow step closer so that his breath touched her cheek. "You fix it after," he said. "Stand pretty now."
Lilette's fingers let the satin go like a fish you tell yourself you meant to throw back all along. The cord settled. It did not look guilty. It did not look anything but the way it had been meant to look by those who believed they owned this day. Mr. Paul stayed a heartbeat more, then tilted his head, eyes drifting half shut again, as if a thought had decided not to finish itself and moved away toward the table with the whiskey cups. The preacher tried again, as if the wind had not ruffled his script. For richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, he said. Lilette's heartbeat rearranged itself into a new song that said, not now, not now, not with his eyes sharp and his shoulder touching the world where we must work. She slid one foot back, eased her weight onto the earth that had known her since her first step, and shifted her plan the way you shift a pot to a cooler part of the fire. Later in the ceremony, there would be a blessing that brought heads down. Or after the kiss, there would be the business of the garland lifting for photographs of memory in minds that needed proof. There is more than one door in any room. She would not take the one guarded by the man with half-closed eyes. Dessa's glance grazed hers, a question, then acceptance. Lilette gave the smallest nod. The ribbon shivered because a leaf nodded too. The vows ended. The ring, a thin, bright circle that seemed too slight to hold any promise honest, slipped over Miss Clarabelle's finger. Belle's music climbed to a place indoor songs don't belong. The preacher smiled into his own authority. I now pronounce you man and wife. There was a ripple of clapping, a sigh of dresses. Mr. Cyrus bent for the kiss that would seal the tidy little story, and as he did so, a gust came up from the river and swelled the veil, made it a small white storm around Clarabelle's head. She laughed, delightful in her own eyes, and flapped one hand like a bird. Mercy, she cried, hold my veil. Dessa, she added with a note of command tucked like a pin in the silk. Here. Dessa stepped in. Her hands found the veil, smoothed it down, and for a sliver of time her arm curved between groom and bride in a natural loop like any seamstress making a moment behave. Lilette saw the opening the wind had given. The judges leaned back a fraction to chuckle at the comedy of cloth. The preacher adjusted his Bible as if to hide his annoyance at the world's refusal to be polite. Mr. Paul turned his head to say something to a man at the whiskey table and looked away from the arch. Lilette lifted her hand. The satin slid again, a whisper on bark. The inner cord waited. Hold, Lilette told herself. Hold till the sound swallows the sound. Belle struck the final chord of the wedding hymn a little too hard. It boomed and vibrated and rolled like thunder, pretending to be a song. Aunt Viney called for the children to bring the cones of sugared peel. The crowd began to move in that uncoordinated way crowds do when a script has ended and life must write itself again. Lilette moved too, the way a servant moves who has been told to move invisibly. Her fingers spoke to the satin. They said, now you are only cloth. Now you are a river. Now you are a door. She guided the loop down a breath more so that it hung where a throat might find it if a man laughed and threw his head back. She did not pull. She guided. The satin obeyed, as if it had been waiting to be shown how to move. Miss Clarabelle, the judge called, sweet as a man can be for a day, show me the pearls on your hem. Clarabelle smiled and lifted the edge of her skirt a mannerly inch. Dessa crouched to pinch the fabric, her face turned away from the judge's view. Now to the supper, someone cried, and there was a scatter of feet and flowers. Mr. Cyrus offered his arm to his bride as if he were offering her a bridge. He led her the 2 steps to where the arch's ribbon would frame them for the photographs of the heart. Judge Bramwell rose slowly, savoring how the crowd's attention fell like confetti on his jolly authority. His hand went to his cravat to perfect it for the gazes. He lifted his chin to the light. Lilette and Dessa breathed together across the space between them, a breath stitched from years.
Lilette placed her fingers once more on the satin. Dessa's hand on the veil looked like any seamstress's obedient steadiness. The river breeze pressed its wet palm to the back of Lilette's neck. In that exact moment, Mr. Paul's voice came again, a lazy drawl that nonetheless carried the taste of iron. "Judge, you set a chair leg in an ant bed." The judge startled, half-turned and laughed. "Let the little soldiers toast me too," he said. His chin lifted higher as he found his joke.
A bit of ash lifted from the cookhouse fire and floated through the air like a black snowflake, landing on the white of the satin and disappearing there as if it had been a period eaten by an eager line. Bell began a new tune, a reel for the aftermirth. The first notes sprouted feet. Lilette saw the room of the world rearrange itself. Mr. Paul's head turned away again, the judge's throat bared and proud, the groom a step nearer the sash of cloth, the bride entertained by her own veil. A dozen white eyes bright as cups, the kitchen smelling of thyme and lemon and iron. She moved her hand, the chord answered. Everything that followed would take the rest of a life to tell, and even then some part of it would remain like the bitter at the bottom of a sweet cup. But for the span of a pulse, it was only two sisters doing what they had trained their bodies and days to do, set a thing straight that wanted to fall, finish the seam, close the door. Lilette's fingers settled their instruction into the satin. Dessa's hand at the bride's back found the second motion hidden behind the need to tidy a veil. The preacher looked down to mark a page. The judge looked up to meet the invisible painter in the sky. Mr. Cyrus bent to whisper a word only his wife could hear. Lilette drew an inch of breath and felt the world lean toward her. Then a shout cracked from the far edge of the yard, one of the stable boys yelling about a loose mare that had found her own idea of freedom and was now galloping along the fence line, tail a flag. Heads turned like flowers to sun, boots scuffed. The judge tilted farther back to see over people's shoulder. The groom laughed and straightened. The veil blew again, covering Dessa's hands in a cloud, hiding the small work of fate inside its whiteness. Lilette's grip tightened the smallest fraction. The satin slipped. The inner cord woke. And Lilette felt a gaze fall on her back like the shadow of a hawk. "Girl," Mr. Paul's voice, right behind her, close enough to taste the word, "hands." She did not turn. She knew if she looked, she would be pulled through a door she hadn't chosen. She kept her eyes on the cravat, the soft column of the judge's throat, the geometry of what must be done. "Hands," he said again, quieter, worse, "where I can see." If she obeyed, the loop would hang there, pretty, pointless. If she did not, he would grab her wrist and the world would tip. She could feel his intention like heat against her skin. And still the mare ran, the crowd shifted, the piano galloped, the veil fluttered, the ant bed teemed. Dessa's eyes found hers across the whiteness. The message there was simple as the river: choose. Lilette slipped two fingers under the satin as if merely to show them to the man behind her, palms empty, obedient, and in that motion, in that veil of obedience, she cupped the cord's heart. She lifted her hands into the light. The satin smiled across her knuckles. Mr. Paul leaned in. She could feel the cloth touch the soft of her wrist, the way river water finds the place between skin and bone and calls it home. He would reach, he would seize, he would say, "What's this?" in a voice whose hobby was harm.
Lilette's breath filled her from heel to throat. It was a whole life's worth. She could taste the salt of it. She could hear Jonas cough in winter, and Mama hum over a pan of hominy, and Aunt Viney click her tongue at a cut of meat, and Dessa laugh in a patch of sunlight. She could feel the alphabet against the roof of her mouth, the one she had traced in the dark, the vowels that mean hope if you sing them right. She turned her left wrist the width of a letter. The world gathered its sound into a single bowl, and every future in the yard leaned over it to drink. Lilette looked at Dessa. Dessa nodded once, her hands hidden in the veil, her face a prayer that had finally learned its own language. "Now," Lilette said, not out loud at all, but with the tremor that moves from tendon to string to door, and the word left her body like a bird that had been born for the sky that waited. Her hand began to close. Her hand began to close. Not a yank, not the kind of wild pulling Mr. Paul expected to catch and punish, only the careful finishing of a seam. The satin loop kissed the judge's neck and tightened without a sound, the hidden hemp biting where no eye looked for hardness. In the same breath, beneath the froth of veil, Dessa's hand found the second loop around Mr. Cyrus's throat as he leaned near the bride to share another bright joke with his mouth. Cloth knows how to pretend. In the first half heartbeat, it looked like the loving drape of celebration. A soft, puzzled sound left the judge, no more than an old man finding his collar too snug. His hand lifted to adjust and found not silk, but certainty. Mr. Cyrus's laugh clipped at the edge, turned to air. The preacher's next word caught against a page that had never stuck before. Lilette did not watch faces. She watched the rope hidden in cloth, the way she watched a boiling pot, one eye, constant, knowing when to lift and when to wait. Her wrists lived on the river. She had tied freight and unlashed ferry knots under wind and in rain, and there is a way the body remembers shores. She set her feet. She breathed. She pulled as if taking slack out of time. For a blink, all the day's noises pretended not to know what was happening. Bell kept playing because hands finish what they start. Aunt Viney's voice carried from the tables, "Mind the sauce, child," because cooks save what can be saved. The children's giggles popped like blackberries in a skillet. Then a chair scraped with the voice of a struck thing, and the judge's polished boots jittered on the ground. And Miss Clarabelle's veil, bothered again by a breeze that had opinions, rose like a white flare. "Papa," she said, the word ridiculous with lace. "Papa." Mr. Paul moved fast in the way a snake moves when it remembers itself. "Hold!" he barked, the sound skidding across the lawn. His hand shot for Lilette's wrist, but she had already stepped through the space his command made, the way a woman turns sideways in a doorway without touching the jamb. His fingers caught only the fringe of her apron. The cord answered her better than any master ever did. Mr. Cyrus clawed at his own collar, as if insulted that the world would dare touch him there. His eyes went bright and wet. He made a sound like a rooster whose morning had been taken. Dessa's weight stayed low, her arms steady, her face folded into the veil so that no one could read her. Only the strip of brown wrist taut with duty. "Cut it!" someone shouted, and a dozen white hands searched their pockets for knives they wore for vanity. "Get the girls!" someone else yelled, and 10 men moved toward Lilette out of habit, like hounds toward Russell. But a piano can shout louder than a man. Bell, poor brave Bell, drove both palms down to the keys in a crash that brought every head back to the arch. Aunt Viney's knife flashed sun as she raised it not toward the sisters, but toward Mr. Paul's knuckles that clutched for Lilette again. That flash made him flinch. Flinching makes time. "Dessa," Lilette breathed, Not a prayer, a braid. Finish.
Dessa's fingers tightened with the seamstress's mercy, the kind that takes a raw edge and tucks it under where it won't fray. Mr. Cyrus's body tried 3 different stories at once: stand tall, fall down, make a show, and then chose the truth gravity offered. He dropped to one knee, eyes darting to the public that had always fed him. He reached for the bride as if her touch could undo physics. Clarabelle, he rasped, and in his mouth her name sounded like a thing he had never owned. The judge's right hand had found the loop at his throat. His left pawed the air for Mr. Paul, who was still a step too far away. He looked suddenly small in his chair, a man returned to the size God gives everyone before money makes them taller. His face was not red or purple as in stories told for pleasure. It was gray, the color of salted meat left too long. Now noise came, an ugly jangle of orders and fear. White ladies clutched their own throats as if to hold their breath inside where it might not be taxed. A boy screamed high. His sound tore the afternoon neat in 2. Miss Clarabelle backed away from her own husband like a girl from a spider's web. "Do something," she said, to no one she could see. "Do something." And the plea had the limp of a limb that had never been used for work. Mr. Paul lunged again. This time he caught Lilette's sleeve, cloth on cloth, and his fingers bit down. Her skin burned under the grip, but she had known worse. She pivoted the way Aunt Viney had shown her with a pot when a man blocked a doorway. Turn the weight, make it his. Mr. Paul stumbled an inch, and in that inch Jonas came back to Lilette so clear she could have said his name aloud. Not the dying Jonas, but the one who laughed with his whole jaw at a joke that wasn't funny. She pulled the inch she needed. The inner hemp had no conscience. It heard work and did it. The judge made a small, private sound. Mr. Cyrus made none at all now. Dessa's shoulders trembled once and steadied, as if the earth itself had put a hand there. "Cut that cloth," Mr. Paul roared, and a hand brought a knife. Young Mr. Reed, the bookkeeper with the surgeon's fantasy. He slashed at the satin where it was prettiest. The blade snagged ribbon and slid useless across the hidden cord. "Harder," someone yelled, but Mr. Reed's palm had already slicked with his own fear, and the knife fell to the grass with a polite thud. Aunt Viney stepped forward into the space made by cowardice. Her knife, thin, kitchen-true, darted once, not at the rope, at Mr. Paul's hand. Blood came sudden and bright as a cardinal. He hollered, more from insult than injury. He swung his other fist and caught Aunt Viney's shoulder. She spun and righted herself, cursing a whisper that sounded like a blessing mispronounced. "Back," Lilette said. And the word was not to Aunt Viney, not to Dessa, not to anyone with a name. It was to the tide of the day. It obeyed. Half the crowd stepped back by the old training of bodies before fear decides otherwise. In that gap, the air cooled once, like a fever breaking. Mr. Cyrus collapsed onto both knees. His eyes met Lilette's, and she saw not the man he had been made into, but a boy he had run from being, one who had once asked the question nobody answered. For a breath she felt something like pity pass through her like a bird that doesn't land. It was gone by the time the second breath came. "Dessa," she said, almost tender, "let go." Her sister did, not the cord, but the need to keep looking at what her hands had done. She dropped the veil. The white fell like snow over Mr. Cyrus's face. The world let out a collective hiss. Boots pounded. 2 men rushed the arch from the whiskey table, but the ant-bat had claimed one leg of the judge's chair. Indeed, it pitched at an angle that puzzled haste. Their shoulders tangled with ribbon. The oak's limb refused to be helpful. "Run!" someone shouted. No one Lilette recognized. Maybe Belle with her brave hands. Maybe one of the field men who had watched Jonas die and decided breath belonged in his own chest today. The shout arrived like a door kicked open inside a house. People moved not toward, but away from. Not to help, but to save themselves. Even kindness has elbows when it's scared. Dessa stood. Her eyes found Lilette's, wide as the river mouth.
In them was a question that had lived there since childhood, since they learned that the world would not hold their weight without charging. What now? Lilette's answer had been written all afternoon in errands no one counted. The smokehouse, by the back door. They moved, not sprinting, that panics dogs and men both, but fast as women go when a pot is boiling over. Mr. Paul bellowed. A bullet hissed past a window somewhere, fired by whose hand not even God would care to name later. A woman fainted like a dress falling off a peg. Children vanished the way rabbits do into the undersides of things. The sisters crossed the yard's middle where the dust remembers every foot. She felt the place notice them. She had walked it 1,000 times with the tray, a pail, a basket of biscuits. She had never walked it like this. Empty-handed and full-hearted, the loop of a dead man's last breath still warm on her palm. She did not look back. In the seam of space between the cookhouse and the smokehouse, a smell met them. Pork, salt, ash, iron. They slipped into the lean door where they traced letters in flour as girls when no one watched. Light bent itself through slats into obedient lines. Hooks hung like idle question marks. In the far corner, behind the cask of brine where Aunt Viney pretended to keep the worst cuts, lay the thing Lilette had moved the night before, a small bundle wrapped in coarse cloth, 2 river lines coiled like sleeping snakes, flint, a twist of dry moss, and an oiled rag around a stub of tallow. Dessa stopped, as if a wall spoke. You meant to burn it." "Not the house," Lilette said softly. "The cotton shed. Smoke brings eyes. Eyes leave their other business. Fire is a mouth that eats plans and spits out chances. We ain't starving today." Her voice was calm. Inside it, a whole percussion of fear beat time like wooden spoons on the memory of a pot. Dessa swallowed. She looked to the door where sun cut the wall into a bright wound. "We can still go. Into the cane. To the river. Take the skiff." "We can," Lilette said. She knelt by the bundle, fingers sure. "You said it. I'll fetch the skiff."
Me? Dessa's fingers closed around the wick stupidly, as if it were a small, surprising animal. She had always lit lamps, kept little flames obedient and tame. This felt like telling a star where to be. Lilette cupped her sister's cheeks. "You already did a bigger thing," she said. "This is only the next thing, small and honest." A sound changed in the yard, the kind of silence that means the first shock has broken and a second thing is choosing its wounds. Voices gathered toward a single command: search. That word has boots. Lilette moved. She lifted 2 slabs of salt pork to expose the gap behind the cask, slipped the coils of thin river rope over her arm, shoved the flint and moss and oiled rag into her apron, and kicked the cask back to hide the hole. "Go," she said. "By the ash barrels. No one sees the smoke until it wants to be seen." Dessa nodded too many times. She formed her mouth around courage like a new vowel. "Okay." "Walk," Lilette said. "Wind don't rush. It just gets where it's going." They split like a single creek forking around a rock. Lilette took the back door to the path that ran behind the wash line toward the river's lip, where a skiff lay under a sycamore shade, its bottom tarred last spring by a field hand with patience. Voices threaded the yard. "Check the quarters. Find those girls. Judge! Judge!" Then a sound that would visit Lilette in sleep later. Miss Clarabelle's scream, the one reserved not for grief but for insult. It was the sound of a woman discovering the world had found her without permission. The river wore its late afternoon face, green-brown, shoulders slick with light, slow as an old song. 2 geese kicked water with unbothered feet. Lilette ducked under the sycamore and put her shoulder to the skiff, eased it out with the quiet born between terror and practice. A dragonfly stitched the air with blue thread. Her hands moved where they had learned, check the plug, lay the coil of rope like sleeping, place the pole, count the oars. Behind her, a small new sound entered the day. A crackle tucked into itself, modest as a whisper in church. Then a breath of heat touched the back of her neck. Dessa had done it. Lilette did not smile. Her mouth had other work. She bent, put her palms under the bow and slid the boat the last inch to water.
It kissed the river like a secret. Footsteps pounded somewhere too close. She flattened behind the trunk and became its shadow. Two men ran past, Mr. Reed among them, his knife found again, his neat hair loosened. The other was a field hand pressed into loyalty in exchange for breath. "Check the landing," Mr. Reed gasped. "They got to try the water." They clattered down to the bend. Their eyes took a quick inventory and invented a story the way frightened eyes do. Nothing yet. They left to find a different lie. Smoke now spoke in a new language, open vowels lifting above roofs, thin at first, then thickening as confidence grows. A shout went up, "Fire!" And in that shout wrote everything the lead had counted on. Panic, importance, men choosing what can be seen from a distance over what hides up close. The math of saving buildings before punishing bodies. Buckets flew to hands and orders split like dry wood. Lillette stepped into the skiff knee-deep and pulled. Water took hold with its old hands. The boat slid out, a begrudged blessing. She kept to the bank where shadows live. 50 yards up, past the cane and the cypress knees that looked like drowned fingers, a small wedge of reeds hit a cut in the bank barely wider than a girl's ribs. She'd learned it 2 summers ago moving crates for the judge's old friend who smuggled silence up and down the river under the name of commerce. In that cut, a narrow gut led to a drowned cypress hollow where a boat could vanish from men who look with the eyes of owners. "Dessa," she whispered to Water, "come like you always did when I said come." She laid the pole and waited. Waiting is easy until you have given the order. Then it becomes a knife laid cool against the throat of time. The fire found its appetite. The cotton shed had been dry as a butler's joke. Flames took to it like a choir that finally knows the tune. Heat pressed its hand down on the yard. Men swore the names of saints they didn't believe in. Belle's piano fell silent. The last note traveled away alone like a bird refusing to land in a tree that had begun to glow. Lillette heard footsteps again. Soft ones this time. The feet of someone who has learned to tread without teaching the ground their name. Dessa slipped into view between 2 barrels and became smoke, then person, then smoke again. She did not run across the last bright seam. She unbuttoned it with her body and came to the river's edge breathing like a hunted thing that had chosen not to be prey anymore. Her eyes found the skiff. Her mouth remembered a smile and forgot it again because there was no time for the luxury of proof. "Here," Lillette said, voice rope low. "Toe first, then knee." Dessa obeyed as she had learned to obey hungers that asked her to live. She folded into the boat. Her hand found Lillette's knee and gripped once, a quick inventory of reality, then dropped to the thwart. Together they pushed into the slow green, vanishing into the reeds the way a thought disappears, but keeps working. The hollow held its cool like a church that has not been told the town is burning. Cypress stumps shouldered the skiff. A heron lifted one leg in protest and then forgave. They lay flat, bodies making themselves the shape of boards. Smoke wrote its long sentence over the sky and ash began to fall like black snow, quiet, guilty of nothing it had done. Dessa turned her head. "Are they?" Lillette closed her eyes once against the picture that wanted to come. "Done," she said. The word did not gloat. It had no room. "Listen." They listened. The yard had become a hive. Orders carried over water oddly as if ashamed of themselves. Buckets to the shed. Keep the flames off the gin. Find those girls. Lock the road. Horses. Where are the... And then, burial soft, a new sound. Women's voices. The ones that don't make the minutes move but tell you where they go. Wailing? Not exactly. Something older. A hum without pitch. Lillette felt it comb her bones. She knew that sound. It was what a field sings when it thinks of rain. "Do we go?" Dessa breathed, every part of her ready to become a muscle.
"Not yet," Lillette said. "They'll sweep the bank in a circle. We move in the gap between commands." They lay in that narrow cradle of green while a wasp traced a map over Dessa's knuckles. Lillette counted inside her ribs, the time it takes men to form a line, to question someone who doesn't want to be questioned, to remember the shed, to remember their pride, to remember the girls who had made their day into a different shape. She thought of anecdotes white men would tell in rooms later, how quick they had been, how wise. She thought of all the truth that would lay under those stories like rock under shallow water. When the buckets found their chant and the first cheer rose, meaning the cotton shed's mouth had been slapped shut, Lillette moved. Now, she said, the word they had learned to trust. She pulled the skiff back along the gut's shadow, slipped them into the river proper, and let current pretend to own their movement for a stretch before she leaned them toward the left bank that belonged to nobody on paper and everybody who knew how to hide. A shot cracked from the dock. A bullet stitched water a yard from the skiff. "There!" a man cried, and 10 heads turned too late. The reeds closed behind them like fingers. Lillette did not look back. Looking is a luxury. She bent to the oars and pulled the way a woman pulls when her whole life is finally allowed into the act. Legs, back, memory, rage braided into something clean. They took the bend. The plantation fell behind like a map folded and put away. The river widened its throat and offered 3 tongues, left to an old ferry, middle to a sandbar and a church abandoned to termites, right to a canal cut by men bought and sold to make other men rich. Lillette chose middle first, then left at the split stone that looked like an ox's head. She did not look at the sky. She listened to water and to the part of herself that had always been a compass, even when she could not read the words for north. Only then did Dessa speak, not as a soldier, but as a girl. Lillette. The name wobbled. "We did it." "We did a piece," Lillette said. "There's the rest yet." "What is the rest?" "Living." The word was heavy as a loaf meant for many mouths. "And all its fuss." Dessa let out a laugh that hopped once and sat down. "I thought the world would feel different under me." "It will," Lillette said. "It just ain't told your feet yet." They rode in the hush that comes after instruments are put down. Sun slid toward the lip of the world and got stuck on the reeds a little, rubbing itself orange. Frogs began their shift. Somewhere, an owl tested a note. At the ferry crossing, they aimed for a snag where driftwood had made a fort for spiders. Lillette nosed the skiff under it and let branches comb their hair into river things. On the far bank, an old man sat on an upturned barrel as if he had grown there. His beard held crumbs of other days. He lifted a hand that might have been a wave or might have been a warning. He did not call out. He had seen too much water to be surprised by 2 girls becoming its thoughts. "Evening," he said finally, when the skiff's shadow kissed his feet. The voice sounded like boards getting along with one another. "The log going by that way 10 minutes past. They ain't friends with turns. You girls friends with turns?" Lillette measured him with the part of her eye that knows the price of bread and when it is fair. "We were made by them." He grinned into his beard. "Then you gonna live to be a story." He gestured with his chin to a seam in the bank. "Cut through there. It looks like a lie. It ain't. Comes out by a stand of Tupelo nobody visits on account of bees, but the bees sleep if you move like you belong. After that, you'll see a shack ain't got walls enough to stop wind, but it stop a boy I used to be. Take water from his barrel and leave him the hush you brought." "Why?" Dessa asked. The word was small and huge. "'Cause I don't like their music," he said, and nodded back the way they had come. "Always the same tune. I'm old. I want a new song before it's over." Lillette tipped her chin. "What's the price of your directions?" The old man's eyes laughed. "You ain't from the sort that thinks help is a coin. Bring me a newspaper when you meet one. I like to see their lives written nice." "We will," Lillette said, and meant it. They slipped where he pointed. The cut was a slit you could miss if you blinked. It accepted them like a mercy created on purpose. Bees hummed gospel in the Tupelo. The sisters moved like members of the congregation who have come too late to draw any eyes. The shack had its back to the world and its front to a small idea of a garden. 3 okra plants stubborn as widows. In the dust was a footprint made by someone whose heel had a notch. Lillette drank water that tasted of tin and hope, and splashed the rest over her hair, leaving the barrel exactly as it had greeted her. Night put its hand over the day's mouth.
Stars came the way they do when a girl thinks to look at them, which is to say shy and then all at once. The sisters ran the skiff along a long sleeve of black. Cicada stitched the edges. Voices thinned behind them and became a rumor the river knew and didn't care to tell. Only when the moon raised the corner of herself did Lillette steer for bank and whisper, "Here." "Where's here?" Dessa asked, because naming is how you keep fear from naming you.
"A mile from any mouth that knows our names." Lillette shipped the oars and let the skiff kiss mud. "We go on foot, leave the boat to seem like a trick of light." They climbed the bank. The world smelled of fern and wet root. Every twig underfoot felt like a confession. An owl wrote commas over their heads. Twice they froze while a deer stepped through the brush with the insolent quiet of a creature nobody commands. Once they flattened for a wagon on the ridge road, its wheels complaining in a tone that said the driver thought himself alone. In the hours when night is honest, they found a rise of ground and a fallen log and collapsed onto it like two letters finally put side by side to mean a word. No sleep took them at first. Too many things jostled for right to be remembered. The judge's gray mouth, Mr. Cyrus's eyes when he saw the truth in Lillette, the way the rope had felt, a creature and a tool, fire bragging to the sky. "Do you think they died?" Dessa whispered into Bark. "Thinking of us?" "I think men like that die thinking the world had a nerve," Lillette said after a long quiet. "If our faces come, it ain't to bring them comfort." Dessa was still. Then, "I don't want comfort from it either." "No," Lillette said gently. "We want consequence. That's a heavier blanket. It warms, but it sweats you." At last, sleep took them each by a different hand. Lillette's dream was nothing she could remember later, only a sensation of wading through cotton to find a field of letters that grew like corn. Dessa dreamed of a door like she had told Lillette under the oak, only now it opened without asking for a password, and behind it there was a room the size of the road. Morning came plain, with bird gossip and a damp hymn on their skirts. Lillette woke first the way women do who have promised someone survival. She sat up slow so the day would not startle. The sky had made itself the color of unwashed milk. Somewhere, a rooster made geography with his throat. "We go to the river town," she said when Dessa blinked into the world. "Not the landing, they'll be there. We take the path that don't look like one." "Then what?" "Then we buy paper with nothing, and we buy a boat with less than nothing, and we buy a map from a man who only sells lies, but we know which way north is without him." She smiled, small and fierce. "Then we go where a woman with our faces can choose her own fears." Dessa scrubbed her hands over her eyes as if erasing the night. "You talk like a book I ain't ready to read." "You ain't got to read it. You only got to turn the pages." They turned them. By noon they had the river town stink under their noses. Fish, sling of beer, hope swatted like flies. Men loitered with the confidence of people for whom the road had always been a table set for them. A poster flapped on a post, a crude sketch of two faces that didn't look like the sisters at all except for the fact of being female and brown and dangerous to men who'd never met danger honest. $50, the ink promised, for information leading to... The rest was wind chewed. "Look at them noses," Dessa said with a snort that surprised Lillette into a grin. "How a man who can't draw a nose is going to find mine?" "Don't gift him with it," Lillette said. She tugged the brim of the hat she traded off a boy for the price of a good lie. "We're two women who sell river greens to boat cooks. That's who we are until we are not." A livery man in a hat too small for his head nodded to our basket of nothing and said, "Got any onion?" "Sold out," Lillette said, letting disappointment do half the work of disguise. "Next boat, then," he said, already forgetting their existence. At the docks, a man with hair like rope and a mouth like a pocket kept a ledger as if it were a holy book. "Passage south is dear," he said without glancing up.
War made everything dear. We ain't buying passage, we buying time. He looked then, suspicious only because the world had taught him the price of women's voices that don't wobble. Time? A place near your cargo for 2 nights. We make ourselves small and useful. We don't ask questions. We don't make you part of any story you don't like. She slid a package on the ledger, a rag wrapped around something with the shape of 3 biscuits. He unwound it to find 2 small brass buttons and a thimble of near pure tin, things that could be coins if you had imagination. He weighed them with his eye. He said, "Tin makes a man's life easy," and his mouth softened. "Put your small and useful behind the tar barrels on the flatboat Nell. She smells like pine because the last cargo did. Don't make yourself a headache." "We're aspirin," Lillette said, a word she had read once and only guessed at. He laughed anyway because confidence knows languages the mouth doesn't. They became cargo. The Nell moved at dusk with the lazy certainty of those who know water will do half their work. Other boats kept her company at a gentleman's distance. The sisters curled among coils of rope that smelt like old summer and watched sky through the slice between barrels. The captain hummed, something Irish or something made in America 3 days ago and already pretending to be old. A deckhand told a joke about a judge who had choked on a peach pit. Men laughed with the part of themselves that likes comfort more than detail. Dessa's hand found Lillette's under cover of pine smell. "Do you think they'll say our names?" "They'll say their own loudly. Ours, they'll mumble. Then they'll change them to suit the tale." "What's our tale, then?" Lillette watched a bat wobble against the first star. 2 women learned to read the world better than the world read them. She paused, and then taught others. Dessa turned on her side. "Others? Freedom eats if you cook for it. We ain't the last mouths." The next day brought rain, the clean kind that makes even bad towns smell like a memory they brag about. The Nell took on barrels of molasses, and one family with eyes like dogs had a butcher's back door. A boy among them traced letters on the rail with his dirty finger. A, B, C, and stopped because nobody cheered. Lillette watched his brow knit and felt the urge rise in her like bread. She held it down. For now, invisibility was the recipe. By sundown, the Nell nosed into a cove where a small settlement pretended to be a town with 3 signs and a preacher who made noise over fish on Saturdays. The captain gave them a look that meant he had not noticed them long enough to learn to miss them. "Off," he grunted. "Storm tomorrow. I don't take kindness with lightning." They went. The town was made of boards that had opinions and roofs that hoped. A woman with a baby on her hips sold cabbage leaves folded around meat. A man under a sign that said "Books for Sale" had 3 pamphlets no one wanted and a Bible with no cover. Lillette bought the worst pamphlet with Mr. Paul's blood dried on a rag in her pocket, traded the rag for words with a man who hadn't bled. He did not notice. Men rarely notice when the cost of what they own is not on their own skin. They found a church with no windows and sat in its dry shadow to read the pamphlet's lies about the prosperity of men whose names sounded like steel. Lillette read the words that made promises to nobody like her and felt the old spark in her hands. "Dessa," she said, "I can teach 10 girls here before next rain to read, maybe 12. River girls run quick." "And then what?" Dessa asked, because plans need chairs to sit in. "Then we go," Lillette said. "Leave a woman who knows her own letters and her own knots. Leave a boy who can find north by the way a sentence is shaped." The church's door creaked. A woman stood there in a dress mended more times than sorrow. She had the flat stare of someone whose hope is busy elsewhere. "You waitin' for prayer?" "We waitin' for weather," Lillette said. "Same thing some days. You look like you could use a roof." "We could use a corner," Lillette said. "I got 4. My name's Ruth. I liked your face because it looks like mine when I think alone." That is how their next life began, not with a proclamation, but woman's sentence offered without lace. Ruth's house had a roof that let rain in only where it was polite about it, and a table that had seen fists and forgiveness both. She fed them cornbread that did not resent its simplicity, and greens that had survived 2 children. When Dessa thanked her too hard, Ruth shrugged. "I ain't a saint," she said. "I'm a woman with a pan. Women with pans can change an era if the era ain't watching." In the weeks that followed, Lilette did what her secret had always wanted to be public about. She taught. Not the letters at first, that comes with trust. She taught knots to boys who only knew how to be tied. She taught girls to read currents with their feet when they fetched water. She taught how to listen for a man coming around a corner by the way dust announces him. Then she taught the letters, one by one, starting with name letters, because nothing is heavier in a child's mouth than their own name learned right. Word traveled the way wind does, through leaves and around corners. At night, men with faces like closed barns asked if Lilette could read the notices nailed at the store for them. She read and did not laugh when the storekeeper's claim about prices turned out to be a hymn to theft. On Sundays, a woman whose boy had been taken north on a promise nobody kept asked if letters could bring him back. She did not lie. "They can bring you forward," she said. The woman cried a sound with no volume and brought flour the next day as if grief needs better when it has something to do. The first time a rider came down the road with the wrong kind of interest, Ruth met him on the stoop with a broom and the look of someone who had run out of shame the winter before last. "No school here," she said, "just women cooking." The rider laughed the careful laugh of a man who wants to appear amused while remembering faces. He rode away. They doubled their watching anyway. At night, on the pallet Ruth made from sacks, Dessa dreamed less of doors and more of rooms. She sewed by day. Sashes and hems, yes, but also the beginnings of uniforms for men who would not call them uniforms yet, men who were drifting out of the owner's logic like logs in floodwater. She stitched pockets where a paper could hide, tucked a second seam where a knife could sleep. "I never knew cloth could hold so much," she said once, laughing like a woman discovering her own shoulder. Cloth held the whole world around us before. We only swapped who comforts. Not everything was faith. Fear lived at the bottom of the bucket and sometimes came up with the water. A little girl named Emmeline cut her thumb on a fishbone and cried because she thought blood made you visible to men with badges. A boy refused letters because the last letter his mother received was from a man selling him. A Sunday came with sirens of weather, the roof surrendered with a sigh, and rain sat at the table like a relative who never gets the hint. Life is not a story that owes its readers satisfaction. It owed them only the chance to keep turning pages, and even that debt went unpaid some weeks. Then one morning, when the light had the pale confidence of a decision made in a better room, a wagon rolled up, with two men and a woman sitting the way people sit who think they bring something you need. The woman wore a hat like a question answered too quick. "We are forming a society," she said before her boot hit the ground, "for the betterment of," and here she paused because she couldn't remember if saying the freed or the Negro was better for her reputation, "of those newly come to their liberty." Ruth leaned on her broom. "Which is it? You saving or you hiring?"
"We are organizing," the woman said, with the cheerfulness of someone who believes the word is a recipe. She turned to Lilette, because authority looks for the straightest spine to speak to. "We need teachers. You read?" "I do," Lilette said simply. "Were you taught?" the woman asked, curiosity edged with suspicion, as if reading without a permission slip might be theft. "I was," Lilette said, "by a hard life and a soft-headed man who left newspaper wrapped around bacon once too often." The woman blinked. Her smile grew new edges. "There is a position in town. Pay is irregular. Gratitude is plentiful. Danger, well," she fluttered a hand as if shooing gnats. "We are changing the world. It is untidy." Ruth grunted. "Untidy ain't the word I'd pick." "Come with us," the woman pressed. "We've heard about you. A judge died out there 2 counties back, choked on, what was it, Mr. Hale?" "Peach pit," said the man with the ledger face, and he winked at Lilette in a way that told her this was the deckhand from the Nell in a different hat, or his cousin born of the same story. Sad business, unexpected fruit. Lilette's mouth did not move. "I teach here," she said, careful.
You can teach more there, the woman said. Rooms, books, protection. The last word was a cloak offered on a windy day. Protection is a liar who sometimes keeps her promises. Lilette looked at Dessa. She looked at Ruth. Ruth's eyes said, "You don't belong to me, but my roof will miss you." Dessa's eyes said, "Where you go, I learned to go the day Mama died, and we kept going anyway." "We'll come," Lilette said. And then, "If my sister runs the sewing at your society, and if Ruth's house is made a kitchen for whoever shows up scared, and if you pay on time or look me in the eye when you don't." The woman laughed with relief because demands meant the world was still shaped the way she understood. "Agreed," she said, already calculating how to forget. "We'll make, what's the word, arrangements." They arranged a future the way poor people always do, with hands, with the small change of human decency, with a stubborn refusal to believe men with pistols own all the hours. In town, the room the society gave Lilette had chalk that broke when you breathed on it, and benches that pinched. The door had a lock that worked only if you threatened it. Children came with ears that had been trained to flinch, and eyes that had been trained to look for exits. Lilette wrote their names on the board as if cutting notches in a door frame. Here you grew. One hot evening, months after the wedding that had broken the season into before and after, Lilette stood in that room and watched Dessa teach a boy to make a stitch that would not betray him when he ran. Outside, wheels clattered. Inside, a girl named Millie sounded out a word that had always been a wall and found it was just a door painted to look like one. Lilette's chest filled with something that hurt nicely. A shadow darkened the doorway. Mr. Paul. He wore a county deputy's badge that had not been carved for him, but which he had convinced himself belonged there. His eyes were not half closed. They were bright as if fever had made them new. Two men stood behind him, one with a newspaper held as if literacy had become a weapon for his kind too. "Well," Mr. Paul said, tasting the word like it might have poison if he said it wrong. "Ain't you hard to find?" The room shrank and stretched at once. Children stiffened into silence. Dessa's hand sank into her work as if to bury a blade. Ruth, from the back, where she had been mending the room's tired broom, straightened into a line that would not break. Lilette put down the chalk. "Class dismissed," she said. The children did not move. "That means stay." She looked at Mr. Paul. "What do you want in a room that makes what you sell less valuable?" He smiled like a slit. "I want you to come answer questions about a judge who forgot how to swallow." He stepped inside and shut the door behind him with his back, a man who likes the sound of wood obeying. The men with him leaned on the wall, trying to look like something larger than what they were. One rustled the newspaper. "Says here," he began, and then faltered because the sentence was longer than his breath. "What's your charge?" Lilette asked. "Being a woman who lived past what you practiced?" "Being a murderer," Mr. Paul said, the syllables savoring themselves. "Being a thief of breath." He tilted his head. "Come quiet, and maybe you die slow. Come loud, and—" He looked at the children. He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Lilette breathed. Fear walked up her spine and set down its valise as if intending to stay. She didn't invite it. She looked at Dessa. She looked at Ruth. Ruth's eyes said, "You don't belong to me, but my roof will miss you." Dessa's eyes said, "Where you go, I learned to go the day Mama died, and we kept going anyway." "You came to the wrong room," she said, gently. Mr. Paul's laugh was a rusty hinge. "I come to the only one you got." He moved forward the width of a lie. Ruth moved too, not to block him, but to stand where her body warmed the space she had chosen to belong to. "This a school," she said. "Don't spill your kind of mess on these benches. I spill where I please." And his hand went to the pistol he wore to teach other men their place. "You," he said to Lilette. "Door." Lilette did not go to the door. She went to the board. She picked up the chalk, and she wrote one word in a hand that had learned to make letters steady even when wrists remembered rope. Witnesses. Dessa's breath caught. The children's eyes, which had learned to read faster than a teacher can teach, widened. Ruth smiled without mirth. Mr. Paul blinked because the earth had moved an inch under his boots, and he hated when it did that.
"What game you playin'?" he said. "No game," Lilette said. "We learned something since we met you under a tree." She tapped the word. "You can kill a woman men don't know. You can't kill one too many people are ready to tell the truth about." "Truth," he said, and the word looked wrong in his mouth. "I got a paper says the truth. Says you two choked a judge in the middle of his own celebration." He grinned. "Ain't even shame in it, sounds like. You want to be famous?" "Famous is a candle. It burns out. Witness is a lantern. It stays if enough hands shield it from the wind." She faced the room. "Children," she said, and her voice was not a shout, but it ended up larger than shouting. "What did you learn this season?" "Names," Millie whispered. "Signs on the road," a boy said. "Knots," another boy said proudly. "And what do you do with a knot that tries to hold you wrong?" Lilette asked. "Cut it or make it hold you right." "Good," Lilette said. She turned back to Mr. Paul. "You have your paper, I have mine." She slapped the board with the chalk. "Every child in this room, every woman in Ruth's yard, every man getting fair weights at the store because I read the card. Every last one can say where we were the day a judge proved the world don't owe a man air just because he paid for other people's." Mr. Paul's smile thinned. "You threatening me with children?" "I'm threatening you with a future that learned to spell itself, and with a town that likes to think itself on the right side of the book." She lowered her voice so it fit only his ears. "You want to try your little badge in front of that? You want to be the man who walks into a school and drags women out for making letters out of breath?" His eyes flicked to the men behind him. They were not brave. Courage is a currency some men never earn. One shifted, uncomfortable. The other looked at the children and found his own childhood standing up on its hind legs and looking him in the face. He swallowed an old thing. Maybe we come back," he muttered. Mr. Paul's jaw worked. He wanted blood. He smelled of the day Lilette had nearly given her hands to his command, and had not. He lifted the pistol, not fully, just enough to flex the world. The room inhaled as one creature. Then a sound came, the low roll of many feet. Not a mob's messy thunder, something steadier. Men and women drew up outside the door, their shapes cutting the rectangle of light into stubborn pieces. Ruth's voice didn't need to rise. "Folks," she said to the shadow of town, "we got a deputy here who forgot what door he ought to be knocking on." "I'm the law," Mr. Paul said, to the door more than to those inside. A man's voice answered from outside. The captain of the Nell, dressed now in his other life, but with the river still in him. "Law likes witnesses, deputy. We got 20. We can make 30 if you steady your hand long enough." Murmurs, the kind that carry weight. "This the teacher? She taught my boy his letters. She read my paper and kept the grocer honest. She sold my brother a pocket that kept him alive when the man in gray fouled him by the road. These girls ain't the ones you bury without writing their names proper first." Mr. Paul's badge seemed to lose an ounce. He glanced at the window, at the blackboard word, at Lilette, who did not step back and did not move forward and whose breath did not beg.
He hated her suddenly for all the reasons men like him always have, because she had not made herself small when he cast the net. "This ain't the end," he said softly, which is what men say when they feel the end peeking over their shoulder. "It's a page," Lilette said. "Turn it." He did with his feet. The men with him peeled from the wall like regret leaving a man late. The door opened to the sound of a town making a decision it would later pretend had been easy. He stepped out. The room exhaled as if its windows had finally been allowed to open. Ruth put her broom down with ceremony. "Well," she said to nobody and everybody, "I got beans on. Learning makes you hungry." Laughter, small, shaky, exactly right, found a place to sit among the benches. Dessa squeezed Lilette's hand. "You spoke like a judge," she whispered. "I spoke like a woman who likes verbs," and she surprised herself with the dryness of her own joke. The children giggled because laughter is how rooms forget fear. She turned back to the board and under witnesses, she wrote 2 more words. "We lead." That night, under a sky that had forgiven the day for being itself, they sat on Ruth's step, eating beans that remembered smoke. People came by in 1s and 2s to leave small things that nation makers never count: a string of fishing line, a thumb of lard, a book of psalms with the page for mourning mended with tread. A boy with the notch-heeled footprint brought a newspaper dangerous as a knife and handed it to the old man from the ferry who had limped to town that evening because curiosity is a fine physician. "Payment accepted," he said gravely, and tucked the paper into his shirt like a bird into a nest. Lilette read the headline out loud to whoever wanted their lives put into true words. "Judge felled by Providence at daughter's wedding. Investigation ongoing." She laughed once, without fun. "Providence takes credit after women do the work," she said. "Let it," Ruth said, "so long as it keeps its hands to itself." Children yawned into laps. The town, which had decided to like itself impressively for a night, began to go home. The old man folded his prize. The captain tipped an invisible hat. The door shut, and the house took a breath that houses take when they have just avoided becoming ruins. "You ready for the rest?" Dessa asked under the quiet. "The rest?" "The leading you wrote on the board." Lilette looked at her sister, and that face lived the whole road they had already walked: the quarter's dust, the judge's gray, the cotton shed's heat, the cypress's hush, Ruth's bread, the children's bright eyes asking the alphabet to belong to them. She felt tired in the way that means you used your life for something more stubborn than despair. She felt young in the way that means you can imagine next summer. "I'm ready to start it again tomorrow," she said. "That's all leading is, 1,000 starts that look like chores." Dessa laid her head on Lilette's shoulder like a truth coming to rest. "Then we will." They sat until the moon put on her second shift. A whippoor wheel called the same name twice. The beans in the pot made sleeping noises. Somewhere far off, under a tree that had been asked to give its shade to things it would rather forget, a ribbon of satin hung from a limb whispering to any wind that would listen, about 2 women who had taught it to be a door. The river, pleased with itself, kept moving, because that is what rivers and stories do when they are not finished, but willing. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.